Hey friends, welcome to Bokeh, a podcast exploring the ever-blurring lines between the personal and business lives of professional photographers. This is your host, Nathan Holritz, and I'm bringing you a special episode of the Bokeh Podcast today called Workflow Wednesday. During these special edition episodes, myself and my co-hosts will focus on helping you develop more efficient daily and weekly workflows around post-production, communication, task and project management, time management, file and image management, and yes, the list does go on. We're going to save you an incredible amount of time in your work week, and we promise not to be too nerdy. This podcast is brought to you by Photographers Edit, custom image editing for the wedding and portrait photographer. Visit photographersedit.com. Live, it's Workflow Wednesday. Hey, everybody. Hey, Haylee, Rich, and Heather.
What's up, guys?
Hanging out today. And for those of you listening in, photographers, both listening and watching for that matter, this is Workflow Wednesday, a series produced by Photographers Edit, where we focus on the very topic of workflow, something applicable to all photographers day in and day out. And we're specifically talking about how to work efficiently. And as a result, hopefully we'll have a little bit more time left to have a life.
Did someone already leave a comment?
They did, yeah. Hey, Sarah. Sarah, thank you for saying hello and listening in.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah, I'd love to see everybody joining in. And by the way, for those of you who are signing in right now, do say hello. Don't hesitate to comment. Say, hey, if you've got questions or comments about what we're going to be talking about, more specifically, how to prepare to photograph a wedding day. We're going to get into that here in just a second. Don't hesitate to chime in. Hey, Cameron, thanks for saying hey, too. Don't hesitate to chime in. And for those of you listening on the podcast, we publish this to the Bokeh Podcast a little bit later in the day. That's Bokeh, B-O-K-E-H, podcast.com. Make sure to come back and take a look at the live video. And if you just go to facebook.com/photogsedit, P-H-O-T-O-G-S. Oh, no, there I go again. I screwed it up. P-H-O-T-O-G-S-E-D-I-T. You think I'd have this down by now. You can come back to the Photographers Edit Facebook page and watch the video if you didn't get to watch live. So do come back and visit. But how have you guys been this week? What's your week been like so far? Heather and Rich?
We're real good. What I'm doing is I just noticed how more professional you look with a big microphone in your face. I feel like we need to have a big microphone right here. You know, we have like a really tiny one right here. Look at that. You know. And, anyway,
we're not. Nobody's judging. Nobody's judging.
I feel like I'm judging myself here. You know. I just every day. You know, it's like how much closer to being like Nathan can I be? You know. So I mean, like.
Until you start with the black T-shirts, man. I don't know if it's going to be.
No, she had a black cardigan on, so maybe she's getting there.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah. Well, you got to follow Heather's example then.
I always do.
How are you doing, Heather?
We're doing well. We had a shot a wedding this past weekend, and
but we get a couple weeks off.
We do. We actually don't have a wedding for 2 weekends.
We're so excited.
So we have a little bit of a breather, a little bit of time to rest and catch up a little bit, get back on our social media game because we fell off the wagon after vacation. So
after talking about social media, you fell off the
exactly. No, before that, we were already off the wagon.
You know, we talk about things we need to do in this podcast.
Lots of knowledge about how things should be going.
Exactly.
Isn't it funny how that works? Yeah. No, I'm certainly guilty of the same. But
we can't always live up to all of the things that we know that we should be doing.
Yeah, that's how it is.
Okay. It starts with self-awareness, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
And you said that you guys shot together the wedding this past weekend. You photographed together.
As usual, these clients hired me to shoot for just a couple of hours. And so my main job was to show up right before the ceremony and during the ceremony, get all those reception details once the room was ready, but before it was disrupted by all the guests. Yep. So that's my main passion that I love doing on wedding days.
And you did a fantastic job.
Thanks.
You know.
And that's what I did this past weekend. So once in a while, yeah.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. Please continue.
No, you're fine. Once in a while, clients will hire me for longer than that. But I would say on average, I'm shooting for 2 to 3 hours.
That's a great deal. And I think I've commented on this before, but good on you all for thinking about that very proactively. I mean, it's easy. I know I did back in the day photographing with my partner. It was an all day ordeal. And our time is valuable. It's not something that we can get back. And so I think thinking about that proactively is really, really important, and adding a value to that even more important in that context. So,
well, I mean, as you shoot, the more weddings we shoot, obviously, the more we know the ebb and flow of a wedding, and we actually can, I just tell my clients, like, I don't need a second shooter for as long as all day. Like, I know how to shoot a wedding, and so there's no point in getting the exact same shot. For there's only a few times during the wedding day that I need a second shooter. So it works out. So I mean, I've never had a complaint about like I wish you had gotten that. If they did, they were very silent about it.
Heather, as much as Rich needs you, he doesn't always need you, apparently.
I wish. She looks amazing on wedding days. And so if I could, I would have her there the entire time.
Yikes.
But man, the way she dresses, she looks so professional.
I love it.
It's so beautiful.
Which we actually are going to talk about this a little bit later in the video. So
yeah, okay. Exactly. Yeah. We should put video.
Drooling already.
I took some photos of her on the last wedding just on Saturday. I wish there was a way to like show these photos.
You're so funny.
She looks so good.
He's so funny.
She always looks good.
It sounds like you run the risk, Rich, of getting distracted while you're supposed to be photographing.
Yeah, exactly.
You're like, babe, can you get out of the way a second so I can't see you? I need to focus.
He's embarrassing me, but I guess I should count my blessings because we celebrate 14 years this month, and I guess that's a good thing.
Gosh.
So
that's awesome. And by the way, you guys mentioned, of course, your photography business, and I had this up on the screen for a little bit for those of you watching the live video, richsmithphotography.com or .net, whichever you prefer. Make sure you check out Rich and Heather's website. But Haylee, you've been very silent over there. Talk to us. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. It's been a pretty normal week for me. I did not have a wedding this past weekend. Yeah.
So what's your week been like?
Just a lot of working, I guess, really.
Okay.
Working for Photographers Edit, doing editing podcast episodes. So we have a lot of great ones coming out in the next couple of days. In the next couple of weeks. So yeah.
Well, and I have to chime in here too. Did you get a haircut? Because your hair looks great.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing.
I got cut about a month ago.
Did you really? Okay.
Y'all saw it that day.
Am I doing the stereotypical guy thing and only noticing it just now?
She styled it differently.
She styled it different today.
There is a difference.
It's usually curly.
Yes, there you go.
Well, it's a great look on you, and we're going to give more reason to our listeners on the Bokeh Podcast side, listening just to audio, to come watch the live feed. Between Heather and Haylee, I mean, you guys are set. So
between watching Rich embarrass me, yes, live. It'll be great.
And I did put Haylee's website up on the screen as well. Haylee not only does work for Photographers Edit, but also is a photographer herself, and kind of a brand strategist of sorts. And in fact, Haylee actually photographed some headshots for Heather just recently. And Sarah was just commenting on this. She said Rich met, so she's commenting on Rich's rant about how wonderful Heather looks, and says that Rich Smith, I agree, her new headshot photos are so cute. So I think we have to give props to Haylee and Heather. Yeah.
Thank you, Sarah.
She's amazing. She's amazing.
Haylee did a great job. I'm very thankful.
I always tell my clients, I'm like, it's kind of sad for my clients because people like Heather more than like me.
No.
And so you're like, when she comes for 2 hours, they're like, hey, she can stay, you can go. How about that? How about,
Not true. He's super likable.
We love you both. We'll give you both props for being wonderful people. And I have to kind of take us maybe in the direction of our conversation at this point, as much as we love being complimentary of each other.
You're looking good today too, Nathan, by the way.
Oh, thank you. You like this is kind of a new idea. I thought I'd try some black t-shirts for a change.
We've never seen you in black.
It works really well for you. You should buy a few of those black t-shirts.
I might have a few. Actually, I just took my kids shopping kind of for school, and my son has a job now, so for work as well. And I actually need to update black t-shirts. As easy as it is to shop for and maintain black t-shirts, they do fade after time, so you do have to update them. Hashtag first world problem. But we're going to actually be getting into a kind of a fun topic today, talking about how we prepare to photograph a wedding day. So, of course, obviously, this is more applicable for wedding photographers specifically. There are certainly plenty of them in our industry. I think there are the last figure that I saw for 2017, there were over 2 million, I think 2.1 million or so weddings that happen in the U.S. every year. And so wedding photography is a pretty significant business opportunity for professional photographers. And, it's kind of funny. I actually had the opportunity to become a part of the wedding photography industry at the point where it was transitioning from being this kind of lackluster profession and career to almost, well, it kind of eventually transitioned into this pseudo or faux rock star existence there for a little bit. I think people have kind of calmed down a little bit since, but it's been interesting to see how things have changed over the years. But this idea of photographing a wedding, it's a very involved process, especially nowadays when we're photographing instead of, just for 2 or 3 hours, for 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16 hours, depending. And the preparation that goes into that process was something that I figured that we could dig into a little bit. And maybe you guys have some hacks and tips and tricks. All 4 of us here have photographed weddings in one form or another. And so I figured we could all lend to the conversation. But Rich and Heather, let's go to you guys first. And what I want to talk about is a couple of things today. First of all, the communication side of things, what that communication looks like with clients leading up to the wedding, especially in the last couple of weeks or so. And then we'll get into gear prep, and then also clothing. We were talking about clothing, and we'll actually get to that here in just a second. Maybe even a little bit of diet too. What snacks we'd like to take along with us. So let's dive in because it's a pretty loaded topic. But Rich and Heather, we'll just go to you first.
Yeah. So I like to have no communication before the wedding and try to shoot from the hip. It's
like
just
photojournalism, right?
Exactly. I don't want to even know. I don't even know what they even look like. I want to guess what my clients look at.
Oh boy. We're in a mood. Right. We're in a mood today, guys. The wedding communication actually starts about 2 months before the wedding. Wow. I have Shoot Q send out a questionnaire to my clients, and that is a pretty extensive wedding questionnaire. I started off, I think I started off using your old questionnaire, Nathan, and then and through the years, I've kind of made it kind of more my own based on my style, and so based upon I'm trying to figure out the whys of my clients, and so basically kind of try to get into their head as much as possible through this questionnaire. Like, why did y'all pick this venue, and what attracted you to this wedding dress? Why did you pick this wedding dress? Because again, I can just shoot a wedding dress, but if she likes a particular part, I like the back a whole lot, or I like the lace, I like this, I like that. Then I can actually know exactly how to really photograph the wedding dress the way she would want the wedding dress to be remembered,
And we're talking a lot about, we could sum this up with one word, which is details, right? Especially for the newer photographers listening, and they're trying to figure out how to go about this process. The attention to detail makes all the difference in the world. If you're going to not just simply photograph a wedding, but photograph a wedding in a way that reflects the bride and groom and their personalities and the thought put into the day, and of course the story associated with the bride and groom and their day. Attention to detail is so important, and so taking time to have those conversations and understand the details so important.
Yeah, and going back to even having a second shooter, I ask all the really important questions for me as an outsider to come in and know exactly. I'm like, what's going on? What's going to happen? I emphasize several times to my clients, no surprises for the photographers, because every once in a while I get a bride and groom that they've come up with this really cool idea, but they want it to be a complete surprise to everybody at the wedding, and a couple of times they didn't tell me either, and I'm like, I'm supposed to document it, there was this one time where this bride. She found her mother's wedding dress in the attic, and so her wedding day actually corresponded to the exact her mom's birthday. So during the reception, she snuck out of the reception to the girls' room, and she put on her mom's dress, and then came out with a wedding like a birthday cake to kind of just celebrate her mom for a little bit. I had no idea this was going to happen. And so I'm literally on the other side of the venue taking detail shots. And all of a sudden,
distracted by Heather's beauty.
Exactly. Yeah. And just like taking photos of Heather, look this way, forget about the wedding. And all of a sudden, like all of this excitement, this all this emotion was happening on the other side. I rush over there and figure out what's happening. I'm like, I had no clue, So basically, from then I added like, hey, what's happening during the wedding day that like again like no surprises for the photographer. I've got to know exactly, because again that helps me again photograph this wedding for the most part by myself. With Heather coming in maybe 2 to 3 hours. For the majority of the day, I'm going to be by myself. I need to know exactly everything that's going to happen.
Are there sentimental items that are of particular importance to the bride or groom that need to be documented?
I mean, I say that locket could have been bought at Target a week ago, or it could be 100 years old. I have no idea. Like I've had clients, they sew a bit of their grandmother's wedding dress in like on the underside of the wedding dress. I've had everything, and obviously if I didn't know to be looking for it or even ask those questions, there's so many details of the wedding. She would not have told me. I would not have taken a photo of it. And then, so yeah, basically I ask all of the really, really important questions about like so I know right beforehand where to be, how to be, what to be even prepared for throughout the entire wedding day.
Can you maybe just sum up? I know it's probably pretty detailed and comprehensive, but can you sum up, give us an idea of how long that questionnaire is, and then maybe give some more examples of the very specific questions that you're asking during that interview? Yeah,
some of the really important questions I ask is definitely the family dynamics. I ask a couple of things. Does any of your family members like hate another person? Like there's been a couple of weddings where I had one wedding where the groom's mom's side had to be photographed before the ceremony, and the groom's dad's side had to be done after the ceremony because they literally did not want to be in the same room together. I mean, like, I'm like, what did this dude do to you? I mean, like, but again, it was very important. I knew exactly that dynamic so I could be aware of it. Normally if there's a divorce couple, I'll be like, I'll ask, are they amicable? Do they get along pretty well? Normally, we're fine together. But then I just put them on either side of the groom, so they're not together, they're not sitting together. I just kind of know these little details that how is your grandparents' health? Do they have a walker? Are they in a wheelchair? Because if they're in poor health, if they can't stand for long, I'm going to put their formal photos at the very beginning so I can get them out of the way so they can get back to a chair. I got to ask all these really, really great questions so that clients know that, hey, I'm very detour. I'm really relaxed, but I also know exactly what's going to happen on your wedding day. I know who is everybody and all that kind of stuff.
Another question that's really relevant that we have found is the bride's dress that she chose. How is it fastened in the back? Does it zip up? Does it button up? Because that actually informs us being very aware of how much time we do or do not have as she's getting into that dress, and her mom and her bridesmaids are helping her. There have been times where it was a zip and it was like literally 2 seconds and it was over with. And sometimes those photos are really important to a bride, the actual, fastening up of the dress or the being, and so being aware of that in advance is really helpful for us to know mentally, to just to be aware of and to know how much time we have to work with. Yeah. So that's another one.
Yeah, I personally like the buttons or the corsage thing. Where I like the
corset.
Corset, corset thing where it just takes like 15 minutes to get a dress. I'm like, I get every angle, every detail. Get people's reactions. I mean, I have all the time in the world.
It gives you time.
The zip up. I'm like, okay, we're gonna do that over and over again. But then I feel like it's less genuine if I'm having to like stage moments, you know what I'm saying? So anyway,
those speaking of those stage shots, especially during preparation, the one that always kills me is the and I probably did it too, but at some point, but is the like the groom buttoning his sleeves, or like putting the cufflinks on. Like, can you set up the shutter, putting your watch on, and you'll see a photographer stage that, and it just, I don't know. there's certainly an opportunity there if you're aware of the details as you're talking about to photograph those things as they happen, at least most of the time. I realize we're not always going to get it, but rather than trying to stage those moments, being aware of the timeline, clearly communicating with the bride and groom. And the cool thing about these kinds of questionnaires is it actually gives them an opportunity to think through some of the details that maybe they hadn't yet. Either they don't have a wedding coordinator, and so these conversations haven't happened, or maybe they do have one, but you're just adding additional thought or question to that wedding day timeline, and working through that, managing expectations thoroughly is really, really important. How many pages long is that questionnaire, Rich?
As an online questionnaire, so I don't really know. Maybe 2 or 3 pages. I don't really know. I mean, like, I guess if you print it out, probably 2 to 3 pages. But I mean, it's an online questionnaire. So, I guess
it's kind of old school of me to ask how many pages, right?
Exactly.
And I'll get to this here in a second after we chat with Haylee. But the questionnaire that I have pulled up on my screen here, I have a digital version of it now. But when I used to do these questionnaires, it was. A lot of the time anyway, it was just handwritten. So pieces of paper printed out, and I'm sitting having a conversation with the clients and filling it out. But 2 to 3 pages, that probably covers a lot of detail on its own. I know that mine is, let's see, I think an actual pieces of paper, 1, 2, 3, 4 sides, I guess. Almost. Okay. So
yeah.
Haylee, let's go to you. Actually, I want to hear a little bit about how you approach this process as you're consulting with clients leading up to the wedding.
Yeah, mine's a little different, but it kind of makes me want to rethink how I'm doing it, because just having it all documented is really nice. But I do have a survey that I send out that's really just like the details that I need to know for the wedding day, of like, is there a timeline? Who are all of your vendors that you're working with? Do I need to, talk to your planner about the timeline? Just those big ones. And then I actually have a meeting with a client, and usually it's with the bride, because a lot of times the brides are a little more excited to talk about their wedding and all the details and plans. And I have them tell me how they envision their day going from start to finish, the important pieces that I need to know about, and especially those relationships, because I've dealt with those too. But yeah, so a little different, but I do have a survey that's just details, and then an in-person meeting that I end up writing down. So I kind of do the old school thing of writing down everything that they tell me.
And how far in advance? And by the way, Kevin chimed in and said, thanks for this. Kevin, thanks for listening in. We're glad to kind of share a little bit of our experience, and hopefully it's definitely helpful in some way. But Haylee, you were talking about both the survey and then the questionnaire. How far in advance are you giving them the survey or sitting down with them in person prior to the wedding?
The survey I'm giving to them right after we book, but they may not have all the answers yet. And I think that's fine. Like, if they need to go back and fill it out again, they can. But the meeting that I'm having with them is usually about a month before, because most brides don't have their entire wedding planned, 6 months in advance. I know for me, a week before my wedding, I was still making final details. I didn't get a bartender until 3 days before my wedding. So it's all those things. Like, you have to kind of roll with how far into planning they are.
Yeah, for sure. And then how do you all both, Rich and Heather and Haylee, how do you all take that information to the wedding day? Because unless you got this incredibly amazing pictographic memory where you can, all those details, you've got them in the back of your mind. You do? Okay. Well,
no, this question will be answered for us in gear prep, in the gear prep question.
Yeah, perfect. We'll save it for then. And I'll just share real briefly what I have as far as a questionnaire is concerned on my end. And you know what? I would even pull this up on the screen, except I actually have old client details in it. So I won't do that right this second. But what I have is I mentioned earlier, a 4-page questionnaire, and I'll just kind of scan through and give you an idea of what's on this questionnaire. The front page was kind of like the basic details. So, I mean, literally their contact information. And it seems kind of obvious. And I think these days, probably more so than, for example, when I photographed this wedding, this was 2009, actually. So quite a while back. But these days, making sure that you not only have the cell phone numbers of obviously the bride and groom, but also their close family members, I think is really important, because if you can't get in touch with somebody, and in fact, the bride and groom really don't need to be bothered most of the time. You want to be able to reach out to the family members or close friends of the bride or the groom in order to find out information about whatever might be going on amidst the timeline of the day. That's really important. But yeah, just the basic details, the location, and then a timeline actually for me was, so for example, just as an idea, some of the details, bride's AM plans, groom's AM plans, the locations, the timeline associated with that. For example, if they're doing something, if they get some kind of activity, I photographed a wedding party. The groomsmen went skeet shooting one time. That's something that happens before the prep even is going down, or they might be going golfing, or the girls might be going out for brunch, whatever it might be. Finding out those details, timeline, location, and then going on to the pre-wedding prep, both for the bride and groom, pre-ceremony portraits, assuming that's happening, if any. And then the ceremony, post-ceremony portraits, and reception. So that's kind of how I had broken down the day timeline-wise on that questionnaire. Important people, and you all alluded to this, I think at some point already as well, but just an introduction of not only family, but as you mentioned, family dynamics, being aware in great detail in some cases of the family dynamics, who to put together, who not to put together, who wants to be photographed together and who doesn't. And being well aware of those family dynamics, both the bride's family, the groom's family, wedding party as well, being aware of how many are in the wedding party, what that's going to look like, how that's going to break down, ring bearer, flower girl. And then any additional special notes, I have that is kind of the bottom. And I think that's where I was entering in, again, details of the family. For example, this particular person, father, I mentioned the father is a talented banjo player, may play at the reception. So just as you were talking about, Rich, attention to those details that make a difference to the story of this bride and groom, really, really important.
I actually even asked for the bridesmaids' email addresses so that I can actually communicate with them before the wedding.
Cool.
Just kind of like, because a lot of times the bridesmaids they've never met me, they don't know how I shoot, and so I'll actually just send them an email that says, here's some great tips. I can't wait to meet you guys, and just know that you're never going to be in my way. I mean, don't feel like you have to you feel like I have my camera aimed generally in your direction. You feel like, I have to, he's aiming toward the bride. I'd get out of the way. I'm like, you're a part of this bride's story about her, just enjoy. I say, the only thing I ask you not to do is to chew gum, because again, it's so hard to take photos of girls chewing gum. And so I basically kind of give them those type of just tips, where like while they're walking toward when the beginning of the wedding, where they're walking in, a lot of times everybody's looking at them, and so some of the shy ones, they'll look down at their flowers, and they're not smiling. There's no emotion to it whatsoever. And I say, hey, I know you might, but I want to be able to see your face and the excitement. Obviously, just fake if you have to, but again, I just kind of give them some pointers. And I've had several bridesmaids email back saying, this is amazing. Thank you so much. I didn't even think about these tiny little details that we can do during the wedding as bridesmaids, So even that, I mean, that's pretty cool.
That does make a big difference. I think that's a really wonderful idea, in fact, and that's certainly not something that we did. I think it would be great to pre-establish some kind of relationship there. We had the wonderful opportunity to work with a variety of clients who, midway through the day when we're actually working with, by the time we get to the portraits, we're photographing the wedding party, the family, wedding party in particular, they almost feel like we're part of the family. Oh, yeah. We just had that kind of connection with the clients. But in some cases, those who are important part of that wedding day may still look at you as more like the hired help, basically, the hired photographer versus somebody who's a close family friend. And that will translate to their comfortability in front of the camera and with you. So I love that you're proactively reaching out to them in advance. I think that's a really, really great idea.
Yeah.
Another element, I'll just share this really quickly and we'll move on. Just finding out how many guests, how big the wedding day is going to actually be, lighting for the ceremony, being aware of what the lighting is going to look like at different points of the day. Of course, that would be dependent on the location, but getting information about that. Finding out if there's any rules about flash photography or moving around during the ceremony. I mean, for those of you who photographed Catholic wedding ceremonies, how strict, and actually not just Catholic ceremonies. And you know how strict those church rules can get at sometimes.
Yep.
And so just being aware of those details ahead of time so you don't make anybody upset, especially for the sake of your brand, but also for the sake of your clients. Also a really, really good thing to do. Finding out if there's a videographer.
Yes,
is a good thing.
That will affect your entire day. Yes.
We love you, videographers.
Oh, absolutely. But yeah, certainly being aware, and then ideally, to Rich's earlier point, proactively reaching out to the videographer even ahead of time would be a good idea, just so there's some type of good. At the beginnings of a good relationship established there, it might make working with them easier on that day. Any additional kind of special traditions that might be incorporated into the wedding day? Again, to the point about details, really, really important as well. And then finding out what time the send-off is going to occur. I think, and it's quite rare at this point, but sometimes you'll have a client who will do a send-off right after the ceremony, and they'll kind of stage that and then go on to the reception. We certainly had that happen. So finding out when that's going to happen, how many guests at the reception, what that whole scene is going to look like. And for the sake of time, I won't go into too much more detail. One of the things that I will add here at the end, though, is the importance of finding out information about the vendors involved. And again, I'm going to go back to Rich's point about proactively reaching out to people ahead of time. I think it would be good for all of us as wedding photographers to proactively reach out. Once you find out, hey, who's the wedding coordinator, the hairstylist, the makeup artist, where did they buy the wedding dress, who's the florist, the caterer, et cetera. Reach out to those people ahead of time, give them a heads up, introduce yourself, and that's an opportunity to establish relationships, which of course can be great for your business on multiple levels. So
yeah, I actually the vendors, hey, just to show them that I actually care. I say, hey, are you doing anything special at this wedding that you want me to pay more attention to? And so I can get these photos to you after the wedding. And they'll be like, oh my goodness, I was going to be taking this photo with my iPhone, and now I have the professional photographer asking me beforehand, and that normally blows vendors away. They're like, wow, that's no one asked me that,
Yeah, you'd think, these days with such easy access to technology and tools that enable us to do these very simple things that can actually make a big impact, that a lot more people will be doing it. I think it's still on the rare side. And so if we just make the little bit of extra effort to be proactive in that way, it's amazing the impact that it can make in the development of our business. Joan chimed in, said, wonderful education. Love this so much. Thanks, Joan, for listening in.
Hi, Joan.
And Sarah, she said, yes, 2 weeks ago, I shot a wedding. And sorry, Rich and Heather, I'm covering you guys up at the bottom of the screen again with
that's okay.
The quote. But yes, 2 weeks ago, I shot a wedding at a church, and I could only go up to the last pew of the guests sitting and photograph from that point. I signed a contract with the church beforehand, so I knew it, but it was interesting. And yeah, that would definitely kind of get in the way of your ability to be able to capture details, especially if you don't have a really long lens. So it's important. Both for planning, just as a photographer, but also, again, for the sake of relationships, to be aware of those details ahead of time. Thanks for sharing that, Sarah.
Yeah.
Let's move from the communication piece, which is so important. We can't emphasize that enough. But let's go from there to gear prep. Take us to the day before or the night before that wedding. What does your gear prep process look like? Let's go back to you, Rich and Heather.
Oh, we go first again. Okay, nice. Okay, so I have some obvious things and some not so obvious things that I have come up with just through experience. But the obvious things is simply just, obviously making sure that my batteries are charged, making sure I have batteries. I did one wedding where I noticed that I don't have any extra batteries, and Heather had to actually come from the house to come bring me some extra batteries, And so it seems like I make a mistake every once in a while, and I'm like, okay, I'm never going to do that. Never going to make that mistake again. And so,
what type of rechargeable batteries are you using? I think we talked about this before, but for those who may not have heard that, what kind are you using, Rich?
Well, I have envelope. What was it? Enelloop? I don't know what it's called. enelloop or something like that. It's the most popular brand.
Enelloop, yeah. Okay, and it's an Amazon brand, correct?
Amazon might have bought them. I know that I can get the rechargeable Amazon stuff, and it's the last generation of envelope and whatever enelloop.
Keep talking. I'm going to go get mine so we can actually pronounce this correctly.
Yeah. And so I'll actually recharge. I'll actually I got the Amazon version of it, and I was doing some research. They're like saying they're great. They work just fine, and but it's just like the last generation of the enelloop. Oh, there he goes.
We'll all do some show and tell here. So for those of you listening on the podcast, we're
how do you even pronounce that? Enelloop.
I don't even know.
I don't know. I was thinking maybe we could pronounce it correctly. I'm still not sure. It is spelled enelloop, but I'm using them actually for recording podcast sessions. They work quite well.
They work amazingly well. So they have the black professional versions, but I just use the white, the rugged kind. Again, doing the research, I found out that although it does have a little bit more oomph to them, to the professional ones, that they don't last anywhere close. They only have like the quarter of the lifespan of the other. And so I'm like,
is oomph like is that a technical term? Oomph.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yes. It's beyond. It's beyond what you can possibly.
Is that the same sound that you make when you see Heather across the room too as you're photographing?
I'm like, whoa.
Oh boy, back on track.
Sorry. Okay.
I'm serious. We need to take some photos. We need to get some photos up of Heather on a wedding day. She looks great.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Next.
So
rechargeable batteries.
Yeah, recharging the camera batteries and my flash batteries. And so it's very, very rare that I actually have to bring extra batteries or put those batteries in my flash last for so long. I normally I use natural light for most of the wedding. I have really high quality lenses that can go down to 1.2 and use available light for as much as possible. But then during the reception, then I'll put the flashes on. So, but normally for a reception, I don't really need to ever change out the batteries. They last really. Those batteries are really great. They're a game changer. I'm so glad that they came out with those. The rechargeable batteries. I remember back in the day where, man, you just had to buy new batteries all the time, and it was so okay. So format.
Did you when you were shooting early on, were you using non-rechargeables, just buying like Duracell or Energizer?
I would get the lithium AA batteries because they had about 10 times the amount of. But then you go into a wedding not knowing again how much more charge is left to them, and so it could die. And so that's the reason they had an amazing recycle time. They were very, very powerful. It's just that I got nervous using them for more than 2 weddings, But they could have been used for maybe 5 weddings. I don't know. I never had any confidence whether or not they're going to quit on me during the first dance, and then I'm like, whatever, some sort of.
They might lose their oomph.
Exactly. I'm like, what?
We'll make sure. Yeah. I was just going to say, we'll make sure to link to the enelloop or enelloop or whatever, however you pronounce these batteries. We'll make sure to link to those in the show notes. But Heather, what were you going to say?
Oh, I just didn't expect a 5-minute conversation on batteries. Sorry.
Keep going.
A couple other obvious things that
I love batteries.
Obviously, he's come alive. I'm bored. I don't know.
All right,
we're losing viewers.
Hashtag marriage. Okay. Formatting memory cards, another obvious one. Cleaning the lenses, another obvious one. Yeah. But I love Rich's not so obvious stuff because I feel like that's really helpful. So I think you should talk about that.
Okay. Yeah, obviously, before you reformat my memory cards, I got to make sure that obviously I physically make sure that I have transferred these images to the hard drive. I basically look on the hard drive and really verify the first image and the last image and how many images are between. I'm paranoid when it comes to that before I format a memory card. And
we actually talked about your backup process in another Workflow Wednesday episode. So we'll make sure to link to that in the show notes too for those of you listening in. And by the way, for those of you watching live or listening on the Bokeh Podcast, if you do go to bokehpodcast.com, you can see the show notes for these Workflow Wednesday episodes as well as all of the other Bokeh Podcast episodes that we put out. Haylee does just an amazing job with those show notes, a lot of detail. So make sure you go check that out. But please continue again.
Okay, so something that's not so obvious is between Heather and I, we shoot with three cameras, and so it just makes it so much easier in the post production is to sync the time on the cameras. It is, I mean, obviously you can do that in Lightroom, but again, it takes so much time to figure out exactly two photos that was taken at the exact same time, and then change the time based on that. So it's just really easy to just sync up the times on the cameras. So all the cameras are literally, and as crazy is that between the three cameras, they're, at least the Canon cameras are horrible with keeping time, because like literally within a week, one camera is literally 5 seconds slower or faster than they are horrible with like keeping time. So like literally the day of the wedding, that's when I'm actually syncing the time on the cameras, because they whatever. So
it really does make a huge difference in the efficiency of post production, especially if you just like to use up your time and process your own images, and you've got to go in and do that yourself. Hashtag photographers edit. It's going to take up a lot of time. And actually, for that matter, even if you are outsourcing your post-production work, organizing the images before you send them off to photographers edit, so much easier if you have synced your cameras ahead of time. So that's a really, really great point. Just a little side note, Rich, when you're putting your hand down, it's bouncing the microphone. So be careful about that.
I apologize.
No biggie. Okay.
If my microphone was suspended, like yours,
if you had the fancy microphone,
we would not have that problem. I could bounce. I could hit my hand on the table, no problem. So all right. Another kind of game changer. This is a game changer for me. It really has revolutionized how organized I am on the wedding day. And this gets back to your question. Is I review all of the information, but the two most important aspects is the timeline for me and the family shot list. Okay, so I put the timeline in my calendar in my Apple iCal, which then syncs up with my Apple Watch. And so literally during the wedding day, I am looking and I know exactly what's about to happen, how much time I have, because it will say you have 5-10 minutes to do this, you have 5 minutes to do that. And so I know exactly I keep on track so well. And in fact, if you use the little sidebar right here, it's called time travel. And I can actually, when I can actually go in the future to see what's about to happen next, and it'll say in the upper right hand corner, it'll say how much time. There's they'll say 45 minutes or 3 hours and 32 seconds, or before the ceremony starts to happen. So I know exactly everything. And the same thing with the shot list. I put the shot list in basically in the reminders app, the native reminders app, and the reminders app also syncs with my phone. So while I'm doing group shots, literally I'm just looking at my watch. I'm reading out people's names, and so normally
it is amazing to watch him in action with his Apple Watch with the family group formals. He is so on it and so efficient that I get comments all the time from people about how painless he made the process. I get comments from vendors about how incredible it is that he has all that information right there. It just keeps things moving along so well for a part of the day that could otherwise be and is often miserable for people, because if a photographer is not on the ball, in fact, I just got a call recently from someone who was explaining that they were at a wedding and the photographer I don't know if it was lack of experience or not having the right personality type to really take charge, but this section of the day went on and on and on, and the people were just saying they were miserable. The bridal party was miserable. So the fact that he uses this reminders app and puts the information, all the formal shot lists with people's names. So he's not standing there saying, okay, mom, dad, grandmother, grandfather. He's actually shouting out people's names and getting people corralled, calling people, getting them together, getting these photos in a very, very efficient way. So
yeah. And I also put all the sentimental things and anything I don't want to miss, like the sentimental things that again, my grandmother's watch or the Bible or whatever. It's in this. It's in, and I'm literally checking it off as a checklist. And so I will not leave that wedding until that reminders app is at least that list is checked off. So it really is a game changer for me.
And it sounds amazing. So I'm curious though too. Do you ever find that some clients are kind of wondering what in the world you're doing, constantly looking at your watch, or is it this process is just so like on point that they don't even question it?
When I read out 20 people's names while I look at my watch, they get that.
They figure it out.
They catch on pretty fast.
Very quickly.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
They're like, wow, he's using his Apple Watch for the, wow, how's he doing that? Oh, that's so cool. That's the reaction, you know?
Yeah. Sometimes I'll make a joke. I'm just looking at the time. I've memorized everybody's names. I'm just looking at the time. Or, and I get a laugh on that. So
do you have reminders set for each item in the calendar for the timeline? So like a 5 minutes ahead of time, you get a reminder that, hey, this is coming up, or 15 minutes ahead of time, or whatever the case?
No, not necessarily. For the most part, I don't want reminders because again, then if the reminders are on, then I'm getting text messages, I'm getting phone calls, and then I'm kind of more distracted in the day. So no, I just utilize it all the time. I know exactly, hey, we're running ahead of schedule. I've actually, so no, I don't, I've never needed to be reminded. I'm just looking at it a lot. I utilize it a lot.
It's very sexy.
Oh, yeah. I need all the help I can get.
This is Heather's favorite part of the day. Rich, you just get to enjoy.
He is like the boss, man. He's like taking charge. He's being funny. He's getting stuff done. It's very sexy.
I charm people.
Man, yeah, we should just do a relationship episode. Forget the rest of this stuff. Let's just talk about how you guys get each other excited, photographing weddings together.
Wow.
Well, group family formals do it for me.
Who knew? Yeah, seriously. All right. Well, we've got about 15 minutes left here. Rich, did you have anything that you wanted to tag on to the end of that there?
Let's see here. Nope.
I think that was the end of that question.
Nope.
Okay. Yeah. So hey, let's jump to you. Let's talk a little bit about gear prep. What is your experience with this, and kind of what are your tips and tricks?
Everything that they said, except I don't do the calendar thing. It's not a bad idea. Probably something I should implement now that I have a watch. But I have for the day of, I have a big camera backpack, and then I have a purse that's not actually a camera bag, but it works as a camera bag. And so I don't carry the backpack around all day, but I do carry the purse around, just because I get really lightheaded and I pass out easily. So I always have candy at a wedding. So if anyone ever passes out, I have candy on me. I try carrying a water bottle in there, but it can get too heavy with other things in there as well. So, but I pack all that the night before. And I pack all my snacks the night before as well.
Can I say something?
Go for it.
I did not know you carried candy around. I may need you to second shoot with me.
I would be happy to second shoot with you.
Man.
Yeah, I don't carry candy. So
you need to start carrying candy, sweetheart.
It's usually Twizzlers because they don't melt in the heat.
That's
so
true.
You have to be
interesting.
patient.
Yeah, we're going to talk. Maybe we'll get into this a little bit more when we talk about what we do eat on the wedding day, what we take with us, because it is I think an interesting point of conversation, especially as much complaining as I've seen from photographers around how they're fed on the wedding day. I think it's important to be prepared, but we'll get to that here in just a second. You talked about kind of mirroring a lot of what Rich and Heather are doing, and preparing all of this the night before. That's a great tip too. It may be kind of matter of fact or obvious to some, but the idea of preparing the night before, so you're not the morning of rushing around and then likely to forget something. I think that's an important step to take. My workflow is relatively similar to you guys. I was going to emphasize the rechargeable batteries, and I think this has become pretty mainstream at this point. I'm not going to spend any more time, Heather. Don't worry.
Heather just fell asleep just a second ago.
But yeah, the actually back in the day, I was using Duracell rechargeable batteries, and they worked really well. This is a little bit of a technical kind of photography tip, but what I found personally was that putting flashes in manual mode, the combination of shooting with flashes in manual mode and using these Duracell rechargeables meant that likely, and at least in some cases, I didn't even have to replace batteries all night at the reception. And it was really incredible how that worked. Using TTL, I guess it's just using a lot more resources, processing resources, or otherwise power for the actual flash itself. And it would burn through batteries quicker. Shooting in manual mode made a big difference. And so that's just a little tip there to add to the conversation. But I think everything else sounds pretty similar. The only other thing that we did kind of differently, and we've talked about this in the past, actually the same episode that I was just alluding to about kind of the image management or backup process. I think I alluded to this in one of those episodes, but we would actually take a hard drive with us to some of these weddings where we're actually backing up images onto this portable hard drive while we were there. And I'm still confused as to why this hasn't become a mainstream thing and why companies haven't, like SanDisk or otherwise, haven't offered these types of solutions. It's even hard to find them on Amazon right now, but it's a portable hard drive with a little LCD screen, and you could actually back up the cards while you were there on site. And so that was something, of course, that we would take with us. And I think at the time, maybe there was 250 gig hard drive on those on that hard drive itself. And so naturally want to make sure that hard drive is cleared as well. But Heather and Rich, I think you were pretty comprehensive in this conversation about that gear prep. And so maybe we can go from that to just very briefly, we've got a few minutes, clothing and snacks. So let's start with clothing. Maybe we can all share our little tips about clothing, and then we'll go to snacks or food after that. Rich and Heather, we'll start with you again.
Yeah, this is actually one of the questions I asked in the questionnaire is, what are your guests wearing? And so this is actually a really interesting question, because I'll actually ask them, hey, is this because if it's a black tie affair versus they're getting married on the beach and all their guests are wearing, shorts and whatnot, me personally, I try to kind of blend in as much as whatever the guests are wearing as possible. And so, because we shot a wedding in Mexico, and like what I normally wear would not have worked. I wanted to kind of like, hey, I got those
linen pants.
Yeah, those white linen.
Banana Republic. Yeah,
I looked good.
But one tip he got a couple years ago that has worked really well for him is one guy said that he really loves Lululemon's dress shirts. They've started, because we're talking about like an athletic brand of clothing here, but I love like the recent athleisure brands, even Under Armour and other brands, even Banana Republic and Express for Men have recently come out with these hybrid fabrics that are designed for performance, but they're also designed to look really nice and professional. So we've had some success with these brands. He has a couple Lululemon shirts that he wears. The trouble that he runs into on wedding days is how he's extending his arms in all different directions, and he's tall. He has a long torso. And so finding a shirt that will stay tucked into pants has been a really big issue for him, to try to look as professional as possible. So most of the time he just wears a colored button-down shirt with some nice pants that are called the Traveler pant from Banana Republic that are super nice. They're modern and they're tailored and they just look really nice. And so
was it Banana Republic or was it Gap that had one called the Photographer pant?
That's Express. Yeah.
Oh, is that that's right. That's right.
Yes,
okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Is that not a good idea, Rich? I'm not sure what the sound
it's just
was.
Express has some fits that don't go well on his body type, because they have some really skinny styles that he's not like a skinny person. And so when you think about like the size of like your thighs and your calves and everything, not every guy is like really that skinny. So anyway, and for myself, I feel like the biggest challenge for me in looking professional is just this fact that the seasons are changing where we live. Like, you have to have something professional looking for all the different seasons. And so I find it harder to look professional and nice certain times of the year, but I'll do dresses in the summer. And if it's cool outside, I do a nice pair of slacks from Express with like a tailored top or tank of some kind, but I do a lot of dresses. He really likes pants on me. So sometimes I feel a little bit less dressy or classy when I'm wearing pants, but he likes it. So yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay. So
I'm just going to quietly nod. I think you've communicated quite clearly his feelings there.
Yeah.
It is really important for us though, to try to match the guests and match the kind of the feel of the wedding. Like he said, we dress very differently in Mexico than we do for a classier indoor wedding here in town,
or versus it's an outdoor wedding. It's very, very relaxed. Everybody's playing cornhole and wearing blue jeans. And, I've shot weddings like that too, and again, I don't want to stand out so much, I just want to kind of match what everybody else is wearing. And it worked out really, really great. Just kind of asking that question, what's the guest wearing? So
he has a nice pair of dress shoes that he'll wear for ceremonies, but then he'll change into like a cool pair of, Adidas black sneakers. They still look tailored and nice, but it's much more comfortable to get through the rest of the reception, and nobody cares. Nobody's looking at his feet. He's busy documenting all the action. So
after the ceremony, I when guests start eating and before I start eating, I'll switch into these shoes. And obviously my comfort level obviously affects how well I can photograph, because obviously if my feet are tremendous amount of pain, or my shoulders are in tremendous. If I'm in pain, then obviously I can't do my job as good as I could. And so during the reception, man, it's party time. I'm kind of putting on.
You definitely seem like the party type, Rich. Like out there dancing hardcore on the dance floor.
He does a little bit. Yeah.
Just drinking away. Give me some more booze. No, anyway.
Did you want us to go ahead and talk about the snack aspect?
Well, let's hit the clothing topic first. Haylee, do you have any tips or suggestions for wedding day clothing?
Yeah, I usually wear all black. It's just something I've always done. It makes it easier for me to pick out clothes. Otherwise, I'd spend hours and hours. But I have probably three, I would call wedding day outfits. And they're all from either Ann Taylor, The Loft, or Old Navy. Usually it's a dress, but I have 2 jumpsuits that I have started wearing that I love. One's from Ann Taylor and one's from Old Navy. So I really like those. They have pockets, which is always nice too.
What about shoes? Do you have a preference with shoes?
Yeah. So it depends on the wedding, because I have a pair of Crocs sandals that I just love, but a lot of weddings, you can't wear sandals too, just because of the environment that you're in. So I would never wear it to a black tie wedding, but I do take a pair of just ballet flats that are plain black for the ceremony, just because people get really weird about what photographers are wearing. So I have those, and then a pair of Toms that I love, and a pair of Vans that I love. But the Vans are usually all through before the wedding, and then I don't wear them at the reception just because guests are real funny.
Now, that's interesting. You say guests are funny about what the photographer's wearing. I don't think I've ever run into any, in the 10 years or so that I shot, anybody ever commented on, at least not in a negative way, on what I was wearing.
Yeah, no one's ever said anything to me personally, but I've been to weddings where they're like, oh my gosh, look at what that photographer's wearing. Why would they ever wear that? And it makes me think of oh, well, what have I worn? So that's why I've stuck to wearing all black, wearing closed-toed shoes usually during the ceremony. But my Crocs, man, they are the most comfortable shoe I've ever bought, and they're sandals. They don't look like Crocs, but
gotcha. Well, and I'm actually to go back to Rich's earlier point about, or Rich or Heather, one of you mentioned the type of clothing. I think Heather, you were talking about Lululemon, the type of clothing that kind of mixes material. So there were a couple, and I wish I knew the brand and I could link you guys to it, but there was a shirt that I wore for the longest time, and I actually ended up buying at least, I think, 2 of them, maybe 3 of them, because they just work so well for me. I sweat relatively easily, and as much as we joke about the black t-shirts, that's where that all started. And so for wedding days in particular, in Chattanooga, Tennessee, high humidity, you just sweat so easily, especially when you're outdoors. And so black was just almost a requirement for me. And I found these great shirts that were kind of a combination nylon, cotton, and maybe at least one other material that made it a little bit stretchy, but then also meant that it didn't really get wrinkled. And then if it did get wet because I was sweating or in the rain or whatever, it also dried off relatively quickly, and they were just perfect. To your point about tucking shirts in, this particular shirt just didn't, but it was black and I was wearing it against black pants. And so it was very easy to almost hide the fact that I didn't have my shirt tucked in. It didn't look informal. It was still a button down and looked really, really nice. So that's my recommendation as far as shirts, is ultimately just find something that's got that mix of material that wicks away moisture easily. And I think and also helps kind of minimize the wrinkle, maximize the professionalism in that sense. The other thing that I'll mention too, and I'll be careful not to go on a rant about this because I'm pretty passionate about the topic, but as far as shoes are concerned, there is, I mean, if you go to the average shoe store and even look at the average a shoe that photographers are probably wearing to photograph a wedding in, you'll notice that, especially the fancier kind of dress shoes, whether it's women's shoes or men's shoes, you'll notice that the toes go to a point, very pointy, in fact, in some cases, and they're squeezing your toes together. And then in some cases, you also have quite a heel to be photographing on. Haylee, you mentioned the flat earlier. I think that's a great idea. But very simply, and I'll leave it at this, wearing a minimalist shoe, and it does take a little bit of working up to this, especially if you're going to shoot 6, 8, 10 hours on it. I've worn minimalist shoes, and the brand that I'm a huge fan of, we'll link to it in the show notes. It's called Vivo Barefoot, VIVO BARE, FOOT, Vivo Barefoot. And I've worn them for years now, but they're very much a minimalist shoe, so you don't have the extra heel or the cushioning that everybody thinks that we need. Our feet are actually made to create that cushion, if that's the word you want to use. And if you give your feet time to build up that strength, they'll do that very thing for you. Not only that, the toe box is actually quite wide, so it gives your feet room to actually work like they're supposed to, and not squeeze those toes up at the end. And they're as comfortable as can be. Ultimately, enables you to be able to build the strength in your feet. And again, it's something that I'd work up to. I wouldn't recommend you go out to now and buy a pair of these and wear them this weekend. You do have to build up a little bit of strength in your feet in order to wear them for an extended period of time. But because I've done it for years now, it's certainly what I'd recommend. It's healthy for your feet. And that would be my other tip about clothing day of. Very quickly, we're actually about at the hour mark at this point. Let's go to food or snack tips very quickly. Rich and Heather.
During wedding day, I don't bring any food. In fact, I don't even think about food.
He's very interesting. He and I are very different in this way. When I'm working, I don't stop thinking about food and needing to eat periodically. I just feel bad way more easily than he does if I'm not doing all the right things for my body. He goes into the zone. And he does not have to eat all day on a wedding day. And he will eat the vendor meal when the bride and groom are eating, when all the guests are eating and there's nothing going on. He will eat the vendor meal, and that's all he needs. It's very interesting to me mentally what happens when he's so focused. Yeah. I'm not that way at all. So I'll bring like a Lara bar or a Cliff bar or one of those RX bars, something like that.
Yeah. One of the things that Heather has to do is she has to remind me to drink. She's like, she'll bring me some water. She's like, here is a drink. Here, drink this now. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. He's a lot tougher than I am. Like I feel bad so much more easily if I'm not drinking enough, if I'm not eating enough. So, like Haylee, you talked about your, getting dizzy so anyway, that's our quick little tidbit about that.
Sorry.
Rich will bring ice waters in these tumblers that we talked about. I feel like we talked about these Starbucks tumblers last week, but he'll bring 2 of those filled with ice water for his car for the trip home. But he's so low maintenance when it comes to eating and drinking on a wedding day, which serves him well. Yeah.
And you mentioned those RX bars. I'll go ahead and throw out my recommendation, or one of my recommendations for snacks, comparable as far as I guess the quality of snack, and that is Kind bars as well. Yeah. We can link to both of these in the show notes. I love the RX bar brand. Their branding, what is it like? What do they say on the front? Like 4 ingredients, no BS, or something like that. And so you actually see the ingredients of the bar listed on the front. My kind of added tip to this conversation would be. And this, again, just like the minimalist shoes, takes a little bit of working up to, but in I guess in an effort to minimize the need to constantly eat, and of course, everybody's body is different. Heather, you pointed out that fact. But for me personally, I don't want to have to rely on constantly needing a sugar boost for my body through the day. So I'm going to eat foods that, for example, if I were to go shoot a wedding this weekend, I would likely take nuts, some mixed nuts, and then potentially a Kind bar or an RX bar, just for a little bit of sugar in my system later in the day if I'm kind of running low on energy. Just a little bit of a boost, but constantly going to sugar-rich foods is also a bad idea, because what that tends to do is give you an insulin spike, and then you have that crash, and then you want more, and you got to go to that insulin spike, and you crash. You repeat that process through the day, and you're making it more difficult for yourself. So my suggestion or tip for those of you listening in would be minimize the high glycemic index, to borrow kind of a geeky term, foods, and go with that stuff that is lower in carbohydrate. And then if you need something, a Kind bar is a good way to go. I know I had one earlier this week, actually, that had only 5 grams of sugar in it. Tasted wonderful. A little bit of chocolate and some grains, and I think nuts. And that was a great go-to. The RX bars are also awesome. And if you want to study branding, check out that brand. It's really, really cool. Haylee, do you have something to add to that conversation about snacks?
Yes, I'm going to go with basically the opposite of what you said, because I am hypoglycemic, so I have to have sugar basically, well, not all the time, but there are times where I can eat a full meal and still feel like I'm going to pass out. And so that's why I do carry the candy around. But for my actual snacks, like, I don't rely on the candy as a meal. It's more of like oh my gosh, I just passed out. I need something in my body. And this will get me back up fast, and I can move on with what I was doing. But I always have peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, because it lasts all day. It doesn't go bad. And it is just really nice, on a wedding day. But I typically have 2 of them with me, so that if another vendor is like, oh, I didn't pack any snacks, I have something in that also builds that relationship, which is really nice.
It's amazing even something like a snack, sharing a snack will do for a relationship, especially when it's unexpected. Yeah,
because I was with a wedding planner one day, and she had passed out it was the middle of July. We were at the Choo Choo, and she passed out and didn't have any snacks, and there was no food around. And so I just pulled out my extra sandwich, and I was like, hey, I have this. Do you want it? And she ate the whole thing. And I got like a super thankful email afterwards, which was really nice. But just having those like extra snacks and tons of water. I feel like I don't drink as much water during, the fall or the spring, but the second summer hits, it's like, I went to a wedding a couple weeks ago. I wasn't shooting it, but I was shooting behind the scenes, and I probably went through 8 bottles of water in the 6 hours I was there. And I don't know. It's the South. It's hot.
It really, the humidity here, it's amazing. Like if you go shoot a wedding in California, it could be 80, 90, 100 degrees even. And it's just a totally different experience than shooting here with the humidity. So hydration is so important. I'll close out our conversation about the food and really the podcast at this point, and today's Workflow Wednesday episode with just a little note here. And then I'll hashtag opinion. Add that this is an opinion, but just an idea. I mentioned earlier that I've seen quite a bit of conversation from the photography industry around really what seems to be kind of an entitlement about the way that photographers are fed on the day of the wedding. And I'll just throw this out as kind of an idea, food for thought, no pun intended originally, but just something to consider. And that is, we are there as photographers to do a job. And while I certainly understand the significance of having nutrient-rich food, especially at the end of the day, we've been going a long time, we need some energy. The notion that we should expect or feel entitled to, the same food, for example, that the wedding party and the bride and groom are eating, I just think it's kind of a short-sighted mentality that gets in the way of focusing on doing our job. Having good food, nutrient-rich food is important. That's why we're making some of these suggestions, in fact. And what I would suggest to our listeners is go prepared for the occasion where maybe you're not going to have a meal, period. Make sure that you've got the stuff along with you that you need to get through the day. But the kind of entitled mentality gets in the way of focusing on creating the best experience for the client versus the other way around. It seems kind of backwards and reverse. in that case. And I'm really surprised at the rants that some photographers go on about that particular topic. So just some food for thought. Kind of set the entitlement mentality aside and focus on serving your clients, creating the best experience for them. And I think so much of what we've talked about today has centered around that idea. I love that. And by the way, Joan says, Heather, you are so good for Rich. Love the Smiths. Thanks, Joan, for commenting. And
wow, you are so good for me, baby.
Thanks, Joan. That's
Sarah,
encouraging.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Sarah actually says, do you all, as photographers, usually grab a plate at the reception? Is this something you have in your contract? And this is to the point that I was just talking about. Heather and Rich, real quick, and Haylee, do you guys include that in your contract?
Yeah, I do have it in my contract. Obviously, I'm not going to sue them, but they don't. I mean, like, I'm not sure why I have my contract, but it's just basically a reminder to them that, like, I'm going to be with them for 8 hours or 10 hours. So, I mean, it's nice, I mean, like, again, but I don't require it. I've
certainly never seen you rant about that particular topic, Rich. I'll just add that as a caveat.
Exactly. And so, but normally I just like, I try to eat when the bride and groom eats. And so I don't particularly, it all depends on the wedding. Sometimes the wedding is very formal. And I'm like, I do not want to go through, even if it's a buffet line, I do not want to go through it. I feel awkward. But sometimes the bride and groom's like, go through the buffet line, enjoy, like they're encouraging me, please sit down. Like they're saying, take a break. You've been working really, really hard. For about 90% of my clients are like that, so like, there's no problem with me getting food, the same food as the guest. But
I would argue that comes from, again, an effort on your part to provide a good experience for your clients. You've been doing this basically all along the way, right? So now they have this relationship with you where they would only naturally encourage you to do that thing versus, again, going in with this kind of expectant mentality. You're there to do a job. They're paying you to do a job, not to come eat at the reception. So the idea that you should have, fill in the blank, I just think it's kind of a backwards mentality. I think that kind of relationship that you establish with your clients is a beautiful example of you focusing on serving them. And as a result, they can't help but just be nice to you.
Yeah, exactly. That's you hit it, nail the head.
Yeah. No, that's how mine is too. Like, I don't have it in my contracts and I never have, and I don't think I ever will, just because, if I present it to someone who dives deep down into contracts and sees that, it could come across as entitled. And that's the only reason I haven't put it in there. But most of my brides have been either close friends or we've gotten to know each other before we booked or I send a contract over. So I haven't run into the issue, but I've also I've never run into the issue of not getting a vendor meal, but I have. It was a wedding I was just at recently where they didn't have plates for the vendors. And so we were scrambling to find plates. And I felt like it was more effort on my part to eat their food rather than just eat the sandwich I had brought. And so to me, I'm not going to pay, like, if a plumber came to my house to fix something on my house, I'm not going to make his meal. So that's kind of how I feel. We are a service, I get the reason you're there all day, but I'm going to bring my own meal, whether you feed me or not. So.
And so, I guess very simply, preparation, right? Just knowing, or I guess setting the expectation aside. By the way, I will say though, it doesn't hurt to also have a good relationship with the wedding coordinator involved, because at that point, I mean, I'm assuming that you guys have experienced this, where the wedding coordinator is like, "Hey, you got some time? Go get some food. You need to eat." Yeah. That relationship is what enables that.
And also as a photographer, there's nothing to document when people are eating. Like, nobody wants photos. Nobody needs photos of that. So it just makes a lot of sense to take advantage of that opportunity if it's presented, for sure. Yeah. And we do,
Wonderful.
So
well,
I think it's a quick meal, but
absolutely. And to that point too, I mean, grab some food. And if you have extra time, this is something we used to do, but we would actually throw together a slideshow during, or at least begin to throw together a slideshow during that time that we could then share during the reception as kind of a surprise to the clients. It's really a whole conversation for a different episode, but
yeah, we've packed it in today.
You can definitely take advantage of that kind of downtime during the meal. In closing, Sarah says, this was helpful. Thanks, guys. Thank you, Sarah, for listening. And to all of those of you who have listened in today to this episode of Workflow Wednesday. As I mentioned before, you can listen to, for those of you watching live or watching the video, want to listen to the podcast, if you just go to bokehpodcast.com, you can listen to the episodes there. We link to the various podcast players from there. And for those of you who are listening, listening on the podcast, if you want to see the video, because we did a little bit of show and tell today. You can just go to facebook.com/photogsedit. And by the way, you can also follow us on Instagram at photogsedit, or go to photographersedit.com if you are interested in getting a bit of your life back and outsourcing your editing. So we'll end on that note. Thank you guys so much. We went a little bit long today. Thanks for your patience. Thanks for sharing all the information. And we'll talk to you next Wednesday.
Thanks, guys.
See you soon.
Thank you so much for listening to the Bokeh Podcast. Will you let us know what you thought by leaving a review of the podcast in iTunes or the Apple Podcast app? And I'd love to hear from you personally with your thoughts about the podcast and maybe suggestions about future topics and guests for the show. My email is nathan@photographersedit.com. The Bokeh Podcast is brought to you by Photographers Edit, custom image editing for the wedding and portrait photographer. Visit photographersedit.com.